It was Halloween night in the quiet town of Haddonfield, Illinois. The sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and purple. Families decorated their homes with flickering jack-o'-lanterns, fake cobwebs, and playful ghosts. The streets filled with laughter as children dressed in colorful costumes, witches, superheroes, and playful monsters, ran from door to door, collecting candy, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. In a large old building called Smith's Grove Sanitarium, something terrifying was about to happen. Inside, the walls were cold and silent, filled with distant cries. Michael Myers, a man who had done something very bad as a child, had escaped. 15 years ago, he had killed his sister, and since then, he had been locked away. Doctors tried to understand his dark mind, but Michael was not just a man. He was pure evil, and now he was free. Dr. Sam Loomis, Michael's doctor, walked nervously through these dark halls. He had spent years trying to understand Michael, whose mind seemed empty and filled only with darkness. Loomis knew Michael would return to Haddonfield, a town he had once terrorized, and he feared what would happen. "He's coming," he whispered to himself, feeling a cold shiver down his spine. He sensed that the town was unaware of the danger approaching. Meanwhile, across town, a girl named Lori Strode walked home from school with her friends Annie Brackett and Linda Vanderklok. Lori was a typical high school student, with long, straight brown hair and innocent blue eyes. She wore a simple white blouse and a long plaid skirt, a modest look that showed her personality. Unlike her friends, who enjoyed flirting and talking about boys, Lori often found comfort in books and movies. Annie was lively, with blonde hair that bounced as she walked. She wore a bright orange sweater that matched her cheerful personality. Annie always made jokes and kept the mood light, while Linda, dressed in tight jeans and a black top, was the more daring of the group. She had an air of confidence about her and loved to show off her looks. As they walked home, Lori felt a strange sensation. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the cheerful atmosphere began to change. Lori glanced over her shoulder, her heart racing slightly. "Do you guys feel like we're being watched?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Come on, Lori, it's just Halloween." Annie laughed, but Lori could see a hint of worry in her eyes, too. "Maybe it's just the scary movies we've been watching," she added, trying to lighten the mood. But Lori couldn't shake the feeling. As they approached her house, the sky turned dark and the air felt heavy. The smell of popcorn filled the air as they prepared for a night of babysitting. They decorated the living room with spooky decorations, laughing as they hung up paper bats and ghosts. Lori's father waved goodbye as he left for work. "Be good, girls," he called out, and the door clicked shut, leaving the girls alone. The atmosphere shifted, the cheerful sounds faded, and an uncomfortable silence settled over the house. Later, as the girls settled in, they heard the phone ring. Lori picked it up, but there was no response. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she asked, but only silence greeted her. The line was dead. She frowned, a knot of unease forming in her stomach. "That's strange," she said, glancing at Annie, who shrugged it off. The doorbell rang, and soon 2 children arrived, Tommy and Lindsay, eager for a night of fun. Tommy was a small boy with bright, curious eyes and a mischievous grin. He wore a pirate costume, complete with a fake sword and a little bandana. Lindsay, slightly older, had a sweet smile and wore a princess dress that sparkled under the lights. They rushed into the house, their excitement filling the air. As the night went on, the sounds of laughter echoed in the house, but Lori still felt uneasy. The wind howled outside, making the windows rattle. She looked out and noticed the trees swaying, their branches reaching into the dark sky. "It's just the wind," she whispered to herself, trying to calm her racing heart. But something felt wrong. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows outside, but when she looked closer, nothing was there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. "Can we watch a scary movie?" Tommy asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "Sure, let's do it," Lori replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. She picked a classic horror film and settled in with the kids. The flickering screen cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the tension in the room heightened. As the characters on the screen screamed and ran from their fears, Lori's mind wandered back to the dark figure she had glimpsed outside. Suddenly the lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Tommy gasped, and Lindsay clutched Lori's arm tightly. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice quivering. "Stay calm. I'll check the fuse," Lori said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. She moved toward the kitchen, feeling her way through the dark. As she fumbled with the flashlight, the cold air seemed to wrap around her, chilling her skin. "Lori, I'm scared," Tommy called from the living room. "I know, just a second," she replied, trying to sound brave. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like someone was watching her. She could almost feel eyes on her back, but when she turned, there was only darkness. After a moment, the lights flickered back on, illuminating the living room once more. The kids were huddled together on the couch, their faces pale. "Are you okay?" Lori asked, kneeling beside them. "Yeah, but can we watch something else? That was scary," Tommy said, his voice small. "Of course. Let's watch something fun," Lori said, but deep down, her unease remained. She glanced out the window again, and her heart stopped. A figure stood at the end of the street, dressed in dark clothing and wearing a pale white mask. The sight sent a chill down her spine, and she quickly turned away, trying to convince herself it was just a trick of the light. The night dragged on, the sounds of children laughing and playing outside, fading as the hour grew late. Lori felt the weight of the silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house. Outside, the wind howled, and the trees swayed ominously. "Time for bed, you two," Lori finally announced, trying to sound cheerful. "We'll read a story before sleep." Tommy and Lindsay groaned but nodded, their eyes still wide with fright. As Lori tucked them into bed, she felt a sense of protectiveness wash over her. She closed the door slightly, leaving a sliver of light in the hallway. "Good night. Sleep tight," she whispered. As she walked back to the living room, the darkness seemed to close in around her. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Lori tried to shake off her fears, telling herself it was just Halloween. But the feeling of unease settled in her stomach. She decided to check on the children one last time. As she approached the door to their room, she heard a soft thump. Her heart raced as she opened the door cautiously. "Kids?" she called, but they were sound asleep, their little faces peaceful. Just then, she heard a noise from downstairs, a loud crash that made her jump. What was that? She whispered to herself. She took a deep breath and slowly descended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under her weight. In the dim light, she saw the living room had been disturbed. The chairs were knocked over, and the curtains swayed as if someone had just left. The panic swelled in her chest as she moved cautiously, scanning the room for any sign of danger. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer came, only the soft whisper of the wind outside. She stepped back, feeling trapped. The phone was dead, and the idea of going outside terrified her. Then she spotted him, Michael Myers, standing by the front door. The white mask was blank, expressionless, and yet it felt alive, filled with malice. Lori froze, her heart racing as she met his cold gaze. "Get away from me," she screamed, adrenaline surging through her veins. With that, she turned and ran, darting back toward the kids' room. She had to protect them. As she reached the door, she swung it open and rushed inside. "Wake up! We need to go!" she cried, shaking the children awake. Tommy and Lindsay blinked in confusion, their faces filled with fear. "Stay quiet and follow me." They stumbled out of bed, their hearts racing. Lori led them to the closet, shoving them inside and whispering, "Stay here and don't make a sound." The children nodded, their eyes wide with fear. Lori stepped back into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the shadows for any sign of movement. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of her own breath, quick and panicked. She knew she had to think clearly to keep Tommy and Lindsay safe. With her back against the wall, she moved toward the stairs, hoping to find a way to escape. But as she reached the top, she caught a glimpse of the pale white mask again. Michael stood at the foot of the stairs, motionless. The air thickened with dread. Lori fought the urge to scream, biting her lip as she made a plan. She glanced around for anything she could use as a weapon. A nearby lamp caught her eye, and she grabbed it, her hands trembling as she held it in front of her like a shield. If she was going to confront him, she needed to be ready. As she started to descend the stairs, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the door to the kids' room slowly creaking open, and panic rushed through her. Had she left it open? In that moment, her instinct to protect the children surged. "Stay back," she shouted, holding the lamp high, her voice echoing in the stillness. She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving the figure at the bottom of the stairs. Michael didn't move. His presence felt suffocating, a promise of violence that made her heart race. She remembered the stories Dr. Loomis had told about him, how he was relentless, driven by a need to kill. He wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. In a moment of clarity, Lori realized that running was no longer an option. She had to face him. She needed to create a diversion to get Tommy and Lindsay out of the house. She took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come. "Tommy, Lindsay!" she called, her voice steadying. "Listen to me. When I say go, you run out the back door and don't look back." The kids' eyes widened in fear as they understood her urgency. "But Lori," Tommy whimpered, shaking his head. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you, I promise," she insisted, her heart breaking at their fear. As the children prepared to follow her command, Lori turned back to face Michael, her grip tightening around the lamp. With fierce determination, she shouted, "Hey, over here!" She raised the lamp above her head, ready to use it if necessary. That was enough to draw Michael's attention. He turned toward her, his movements slow and deliberate, the mask reflecting the dim light of the room. Lori took a step back, knowing she had to buy time. "Go! Now!" Lori screamed at the children as Tommy and Lindsay bolted out of the closet and toward the back door. She didn't dare take her eyes off Michael as they fled, knowing they needed to reach safety. Just as the children reached the back door, Michael lunged. Lori swung the lamp with all her strength, the glass shattering against the wall as it missed its target. Michael stumbled slightly, but quickly regained his balance, a low growl escaping from behind the mask. "Run!" Lori screamed, her heart racing as the kids disappeared into the darkness outside. She could hear their footsteps pounding against the pavement as they sprinted down the street, fear pushing them forward. Lori knew she had to keep Michael occupied to give them a chance to escape. She backed away slowly, still facing him. With every step, she searched for something, anything, that could help her turn the tables. In the corner of the living room, she spotted a knife set on the counter. It was a long shot, but she needed to get closer. "You're not going to get them," she shouted defiantly, trying to summon her courage. Michael advanced, slow and deliberate, the silence around them heavy with anticipation. Lori suddenly turned and ran toward the kitchen, her heart pounding as she reached for the knife. She grabbed a large kitchen knife, gripping it tightly as she turned back to face him. Michael advanced, slow and deliberate, the silence around them heavy with anticipation. Lori suddenly turned and ran toward the kitchen, her heart pounding as she reached for the knife. She grabbed a large kitchen knife, gripping it tightly as she turned back to face him. "Stay away from me," she yelled, brandishing the knife like a shield. Michael stopped, tilting his head slightly as if assessing her. He seemed almost amused, and that only fueled Lori's anger. "Get out of my house!" she screamed, lunging at him. The knife caught the dim light as she swung, narrowly grazing his arm. Michael didn't flinch, but Lori felt a rush of adrenaline. She had fought back. Michael retaliated, lunging forward and knocking the knife from her hand. It clattered to the floor as Lori stumbled backward, desperately trying to regain her balance. She had to think quickly. She reached for the lamp again, using it as a makeshift weapon once more. But before she could strike, Michael grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. Panic surged through her as she struggled to break free, but he was too strong. "Get away from her," came a voice from the doorway. It was Dr. Loomis, holding a gun and rushing into the house. He had been searching for Michael all night, knowing chaos would follow if he escaped. "Michael!" Loomis shouted, his voice filled with authority. "You don't want to do this!" The distraction was enough. Lori seized the moment, wrenching her arm free and scrambling toward the back door. She could hear Loomis shouting again, trying to draw Michael's attention. Just as she reached the door, she turned to see Loomis standing firm, gun aimed at Michael. "Get outside, Lori, now!" Without looking back, Lori burst through the door, her feet pounding against the ground as she ran toward the safety of the street. The cold night air filled her lungs. But she could hear the chaos behind her. Loomis confronting Michael, the sound of a struggle. The children were huddled together at the end of the driveway, their eyes wide with fear. Lori scooped them up in her arms, relief flooding through her. "We need to get out of here," she urged, her voice shaking as they sprinted away from the house. As they ran down the street, the distant sounds of sirens echoed through the night, growing louder with each passing moment. Lori didn't stop until they reached the safety of a neighbor's house, pounding on the door and yelling for help. The door swung open, and a terrified neighbor ushered them inside, closing the door behind them. "What's happening?" she asked, panic in her eyes. "Michael Myers is back," Lori gasped, breathless. "He's trying to kill us." Outside, the night was filled with the sound of sirens and chaos as the police arrived, their lights flashing in the darkness. Lori looked back at the house, her heart racing, hoping Dr. Loomis was okay. In that moment, she knew she had faced her greatest fear and survived. As long as they were together, they would be safe. She wrapped her arms around Tommy and Lindsay, holding them close, knowing that Halloween would never be the same again. The night was still young, but the darkness that had once loomed over Haddonfield was now filled with the promise of light, of survival, of hope. The nightmare might not be over, but for tonight, they were free.
If you enjoyed the tale, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more exciting tales. See you next time.